Okay, we'll call the Senate Minerals Banking and Economic Development Committee together. First order of business is roll call, but before we do that, I'm going to do a little chairman's prerogative, and I'm going to change the schedule, and we're going to hear Senate File 143 first, and then Senate File 135. So, Sue, would you do the roll call, please?
Senator Cooper.
Here.
Senator Jones. Here. Senator Nethercott. Here. Senator Rothfuss.
Excused.
Chairman Anderson.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. So the first bill to come before us is Senate File 143. And do we have anyone that would like to speak on Senate File 143?
Mr. Chairman,
have somebody.
the sponsor would like to speak.
All right,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
Good senators, you have before you public monies, deposits, and credit unions. This is a bill that you have seen before. The Senate has voted on historically and been unable to get it through the finish line. And I'm hopeful that this year will be a new frontier with that history. And you will authorize credit unions to be allowed to deposit public funds, which currently is prohibited in law. So the bill itself is very simple. It's long because of all of the references to where the deposits of public funds may go. And so throughout our statutes, we have updated those provisions to simply add the words "or credit union" where a bank can currently receive those public deposits. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill in its entirety. And really, the impetus for this bill is the why, which is to establish what I believe is a level playing field within our communities for the deposits of these funds between our financial institutions. I don't think that this presents a threat to our friends in the banking industry. I think their success within our state will continue, and I think it provides flexibility to our public institutions and, more importantly, to the taxpayers for the placement of those funds in these secure financial institutions. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, as a result of this committee and this debate having been ongoing for years now, I'm happy to stand for questions on the bill. If not, I'd like to turn it over to public comment and then reserve an opportunity to come back for final questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the presenter? Any questions for the presenter? I'm not familiar with this, so I'm going to ask this question. The National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund, it's put in here a couple of times. What's the difference in that? Why is it the Share Insurance Fund?
You know, Mr. Chairman, there are members of the credit unions and the associations here that can speak with more specificity as to that. But credit unions aren't dissimilar to the security that banks provide. They have, the funds are secured up to $250,000 for those deposits, similar to an FDIC concept. And so these types of other vehicles with which to provide consumer confidence and protections exist. And so, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to direct my attention to what you're looking at, that might be helpful. What page?
Well, I thought you knew.
Well,
Page 7, you've got it on there twice.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is the version of the credit union's FDIC.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the presenter? Any other questions for the presenter? If not, we're going to open it up to agencies first. Any agencies like to talk about this? Senate File 141. 43, excuse me. Excuse me, thank you for the correction. No agencies want to talk about it? We're going to open it up to the public. It looks like some people might want to talk about this. Please identify yourself and
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bill Novotny. I'm a Johnson County Commissioner, I'm here today on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We stand in strong support of this bill. We see this as a valuable tool for our communities across the state that don't have a community bank. Look at the town of Shoshone, the towns of Wright. Those clerks are forced to drive deposits into communities where they can then deposit those in financial institutions. Allowing them to make those deposits in credit unions gives them an opportunity to have those financial services. We really look at it as a safety risk. Sometimes it's my sheriff's deputies who are driving those deposits up to Buffalo for the town of KC, because with one clerk, if she goes to make the deposit, town hall closes. This is also going to be potentially an additional tool that may be utilized by our smaller special districts. They also receive public funds and need an opportunity to deposit them in financial institutions. Credit unions are fully covered under insurance programs. They are safe. They are utilized by your constituents. They are utilized by my constituents. Many of us are members of credit unions in addition to being members of our local community banks. We have been so close to getting this bill across the finish line, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Let's do that. Let's give our local government the opportunity to use this tool to better serve our constituents. Thank you, and I'd answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Novotny? Questions for Mr. Novotny? No questions? Thanks, Mr. Novotny. And
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I don't know if I need to say anything. The county commissioners really carried my water for me today, and I hate that he stole my thunder, but for all the reasons he just stated, we are in definite support of this bill. I do believe my mayor of Shoshone is on and can talk to you about the nuances and problematic issues he's had with not having a bank in his town, so he would love to be able to leverage the credit union that's right across the street. So, and with that, I'll stand for questions.
questions for Wyoming Association of Municipalities? No questions? No questions. Thank you, Ashley. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bobby Frank, representing Wyoming's credit unions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. We have provided you via email and also hard copies in your folders a couple of documents that I'll reference. One is our white paper outlining some of the challenges in addressing some of the previous issues that have been raised on this particular legislation. I've also provided this morning a couple of copies of a state treasurer's report, and I'll reference that document later in my testimony. I'm joined today by Tyler Valentine, President and CEO of StagePoint, Stephanie Props, President and CEO of Blue Federal Credit Union, and online Julie Dunham, who is the President and CEO of Sunlight Federal Credit Union in the Bighorn Basin, and she'll provide some additional testimony when it's appropriate. Wyoming's credit unions serve 330,000 members, employ 900 individuals, and based on the economic report, which is an independent economic report completed by Oxford, contributes an additional $178 million to the state's economy. I have provided you with a few examples of credit unions and how not being able to, public entities being able to do business with them impede their ability to serve their members and constituents. Mr. Valentine and Ms. Dunham will provide you with some additional details on some examples that they have to share. I would draw your attention to the additional impediments in the white paper, and I will just briefly hit on those in the essence of time. The Commissioners Association mentioned two, which is the small communities that have a credit union presence but not a bank are still unable to do business with those credit unions. Other issues that have arisen is a livestock producer, an ag producer in Fremont County that was approved for state farm loan funds and wanted those directed through his credit union to be administered, and that was not allowed because they're state funds. We have local PTAs who have attempted to open accounts at their local credit union, First Education, and they're unable to do so because they operate under the school district's EIN. Mr. Chairman, I know there is discussion about a natural disaster loan program. We were recently asked if credit unions would partner in that effort, should it come to pass. They would be more than willing to do so, but unfortunately, unless public funds can be directed to credit unions as well as our banks, that their involvement would not be possible. I'd like to highlight a few examples of contributing credit unions' contributions to their communities. I know that's been an issue in the past. In 2023 alone, credit unions invested over $800,000 in 500 nonprofit organizations, ranging from the First Lady's Hunger Initiative, Boys and Girls Club, support for our veterans, assistance to people struggling with their utility needs, and many more. Credit unions awarded over $110,000 in scholarships to Wyoming students and provided free financial education to over 8,400 adults. Mr. Chairman, I would like to pivot to the data in the second handout that you should have pertaining to the State Treasurer's Time Deposit on Account program. This program is a discretionary program which allows the State Treasurer to invest and deposit funds in Wyoming's approved public depositories. In 2023, only 21 of the 43 approved public depositories participated in the program. In 2024, only 19 of 42 participated. Deposits to out-of-state banks through the program totaled $51 million in 2023 and $126 in 2024. Wyoming's approved public depositories include banks that were part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance and are debanking Wyoming's core industries. I have provided a link in the electronic version of that white paper to the Attorney General's letter signed March 6, 2024 from 16 Attorney Generals, including Wyoming's, discussing Wells Fargo's debanking of industry and discriminating against several that are important to this state. I've also provided you with some data reflecting Q2 2024 deposit balance in Wyoming. Credit union share of deposits in Wyoming is $4.8 billion. Community banks, $8.7 billion, and banks headquartered elsewhere, $11.9 billion. With a good chunk of that in the previously mentioned banks. Mr. Chairman, this program provides an opportunity to expand the ability of the state to reinvest in our own communities and our own citizens. As you can see, there's ample opportunity, given that the program is not fully utilized. It would help the financial well-being of our citizens and our communities. I'd like to turn now to the issue of taxation. Credit unions are exempt from federal corporate income tax, and they have been since 1934. They are exempt because of their not-for-profit structure. They are member-owned cooperatives. I would like to highlight some of the contributions, however, that they do make. Credit unions, as I previously mentioned, employ 900 people in Wyoming. Credit unions themselves pay property taxes. Credit unions pay employment taxes. They are sales tax exempt because of their federal tax exempt status, but several have reported that they do pay sales tax on everyday purchases. I just providing an example, in 2023, credit unions granted $500 million in vehicle loans. At 4%, that would have generated $20 million in sales tax. They make contributions in this state. Credit union members pay taxes on earnings, their share earnings. I just got my 1099 INT for earnings on my share deposit. Those earnings are taxed, and I will be paying my share of taxes on my credit union dividends. Mr. Chairman, I've provided on the white paper regulatory oversight of credit unions, the exams, and then, as you questioned earlier, the NCUA Share Insurance Fund, which is similar to the FDIC. To address any of the issues that have been raised previously on the legality of deposits, public deposits, and credit unions, I've also provided you a link of past Attorney General opinions as well as LSO attorney opinions and private legal counsel, and I'd refer you to those as those questions arise. And Mr. Chairman, I would just like to close with the following thought, and Mr. Novotny mentioned it in his testimony. When I discuss this issue across the state, I often get the remark made that a lot of people do business with both our community banks and our credit unions as individuals. I personally do as well. I love my community bank and I love my credit unions. We would appreciate if the local government special districts in the state were afforded that same opportunity. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we are hopeful that we could work together with our community-based financial institutions to help Wyoming citizens in our communities. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Bobby Frank? Questions? A question from you either? No? No question. Do the other two of you want to talk, or was that pretty complete?
Nope, I'll add my thoughts here, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to testify before you. I'm Tyler Valentine. I'm the president and CEO of StagePoint Federal Credit Union in Laramie, Wyoming. We also recently merged with Wyo Central Federal Credit Union up in Casper, so we're expanding our field of membership to the Casper community as well. My credit union, StagePoint, was chartered in 1935 by members, employees of the railroad industry in Laramie, and Wyo Central was chartered in 1954 by employees of the oil and gas industry. Today, we proudly serve approximately 9,000 members across our state, and we're committed to serving those communities. Our credit union for the past 3 years has provided 4 staff volunteers to assist with clerking the Albany County Junior Livestock Auction for our local 4-H and FFA kids. We also keep the official sale book, reconcile the sales receipts and billings, and work with the sale committee on final accounting. StagePoint also supports the carcass, or sponsors the carcass contest at the Albany County Fair. As a born and raised Wyoming ranch kid, this is 4-H is a program and a organization that's very near and dear to my heart, and I love being able to give back to them. But despite our service to that organization and handling the junior livestock auction sale proceeds, the credit union can't accept the deposits and disperse them to the participating youth. We take the sale proceeds back at the end of the sale, we lock them in our vault, and the following week, the fair manager comes and gets them and takes them down the street to a bank to actually deposit them. And that fair manager, is actually asked to have the account at StagePoint, and unfortunately, we are barred from doing so. We also run into instances with the local chamber and economic development corporation sending out RFPs for financial institutions, and credit unions have to be excluded from that because they take public money for the development, those economic development projects. And so credit unions can't participate. So we would greatly appreciate your support on Senate File 143 to allow us to serve our community. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Any questions? You probably get pretty popular around February 15th.
I do. Thank you.
Are you from Glen Rock?
I am.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know the family.
Yes. I hope in a good way. Good.
All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Stephanie Props, and I'm the president and CEO of Blue Federal Credit Union. I very much appreciate the opportunity to provide this testimony on Senate File 143 and share a little bit about Blue's contribution to our communities. So across Blue's footprint, our main goal is serving our members and being a community connector. We were formed in 1951 to serve F.E. Warren Air Force Base right here in Cheyenne. Now, over 70 years later, Blue's dedication to our membership in Cheyenne has never wavered and has expanded along with our growth. We are headquartered right here in Cheyenne, and we have 8 Wyoming locations. Blue's been a committed community partner. We serve over 30,000 members, and we provide 187 jobs just in Wyoming. We do pay property taxes, and in 2024, we paid $230,000. Although we are sales tax exempt, as Bobby mentioned, we do still pay sales tax on many of our purchases through our fleet vehicles that we purchase. We also pay on our corporate credit cards just in our everyday purchases. As a not-for-profit, member-owned cooperative, we are committed to investing back in our communities through our members through dividends, lower fees, and lower rates. We are committed to the communities that we serve. In Wyoming, in 2024, we invested in over $67,000 in 26 organizations such as Meals on Wheels, the Kiwanis, and the Children's Society, just to name a few. In 2024, we also awarded nearly $13,000 in scholarships to Wyoming students, and through our Blue Foundation, we have awarded $16,000 in grants to organizations helping those in need, including Safe House and Needs. We are proud to be a significant partner with Cheyenne Frontier Days, an event that has significant economic impact to our community. We also support our students at Laramie County Community College through our investment in their recreation and athletics complex. Through our Blue Foundation, we have established our Blue Boost Center here in Cheyenne. The Boost Center's mission is to champion, fund, and celebrate the local nonprofit causes that strengthen our community, ensuring financial stability and promoting health and well-being. We would appreciate your support of Senate File 143 to allow our public entities the choice to also conduct business with credit unions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Stephanie? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Stephanie. You
Thank
certainly
you.
have a nice building over there, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, thank you. Anyone else like to talk on Senate File 143? 143. Anyone else in the room like to talk about 143? Yes.
I've seen this guy before.
I think he kind of feels like Custer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Scott Meyer. They must think I'm a real dangerous guy.
Yeah.
I may be outnumbered, but I don't think I'm outgunned. You're known. All right, let's talk about this a little bit, having heard the testimony, and let's just kind of lay what makes things even around here. Is the playing field that they've talked about unequal because credit unions cannot work with public entities? No. The disparity arises because credit unions and banks are two different types of entities and have two distinct missions. So let's talk about a little bit. I heard about some of the discussion about ownership. So let's talk about ownership. Credit unions are owned and governed by their members. When a person opens an account with a credit union, they do so by buying a share. Maybe it's $5, maybe it's something else, but they have a share in the credit union now. This share will remain in place as long as that person remains a member. When that person closes their account, they get their money back. But while they're a member, that person can actively participate in the organization's affairs by direct voting. For example, all members participate in the election of the credit union's board of directors. Banks, on the other hand, are owned by their shareholders. Bank shareholders elect their board of directors to participate in the bank's governance. Regular customers of the bank do not. The bank's board of directors sets policy. Customers do not, unlike a credit union. So how does it work when a political subdivision of some sort wants to deposit funds in a credit union? That political subdivision now becomes a member of that credit union, which means it is a part owner with all the rights, the privileges, and obligations that go with that ownership. As such, the political subdivision is now directly competing with businesses in that community, especially the bank. I haven't seen very many of those opportunities, and I question that, whether they really want to be competing with their own businesses in that community. Conversations were just brought up about taxes. And I agree with everything that was said, but there's a few things that are missing in all this. Generally, owners of those businesses do pay taxes either directly through corporate tax or indirectly through pass-through entities. Over 90% of America's small businesses, which includes most of your community banks, by the way, are structured as pass-through entities. These kind of pass-through entities include like partnerships, LLCs, S corporations. And the pass-through entity means that of those businesses, they pay taxes at the owners pay taxes at the individual level and not at the corporate level. So like other small businesses, many of your community banks are structured like pass-through entities. That means that the banks are paying income taxes just like you and me. And like other small businesses in Wyoming, banks pay their sales tax on all goods and services that business consumes. Now, the discussion was brought up a little bit, well, of course, the members pay on their shares, on their interest, sure. Initially, the federal exemption that was working on that was designed because they were getting their shares on their interest and dividends. But guess what? All the banks' customers get their 1099s as well. What the owners of the credit union, the members, are not paying is on the income that's generated by the credit union. So that's a difference right there. Think about credit unions in general. Initially, the federal tax exemption was designed to create access to affordable, basic financial services for people of modest means who would otherwise lack access to that services. I witnessed one in my hometown when my next door neighbor created a credit union right in his own garage. I was pretty young, but I got to see it all happen. Those types of credit unions are limited to those with a common bond, i.e., the one that I saw in Lander was for the employees of the steel mining operation there. Great. Due to the membership changes, though, through the laws, credit unions now can expand their areas to anything they want, pretty much. In 2021, the successor to that small credit union that I talked about expanded their field of membership to include anybody who lives, works, or worships in Wyoming. That's not a select employee group. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to go competing head-to-head with the banks. Fine, we welcome the competition. But when you talk about head-to-head competition on the tax aspect, these credit unions kind of portray themselves as, my word, we're for the mom and pops industry. Today, they're a $2.2 trillion industry. That's not your local community credit union. That's big business. And most of them are indistinguishable from banks. The big difference is, as was mentioned earlier, is they don't pay federal income taxes. And that deprives the U.S. Treasury of nearly $3.1 billion annually. Now, in 2023, Wyoming credit unions used their tax exempt to avoid paying over $8 million in federal income taxes, just in Wyoming. This is such a significant number, and it's such a significant push nationwide that the Trump administration now is pushing Congress to say, take away that tax exemption because it's not doing its purpose. It's big business. And when you think about who is paying taxes right now, in 2023, the last years that I have numbers, Wyoming credit unions held over $5 billion in tax-free assets. And yet, think about it. While they're not paying any income taxes on that, the nurses in Wyoming paid over $57 million in taxes. That's just our nurses. Our cashiers in Wyoming paid almost $10 million in taxes. Teachers in Wyoming paid over $16 million in taxes. These are the people that are paying the taxes, not the credit union. And as for the tax exempt status, a credit union, as was earlier mentioned, isn't just avoiding the income taxes, they are paying credit. They're not paying sales taxes. Imagine doing that within the business. That means the furniture, the equipment, the supplies. Maybe they do pay on here's a credit union, a credit card, and maybe they're paying on some minor things, but I'm telling you, a majority of that is not. And that is taxes that you and I pay to fund our local services, and that's not getting paid. Now let's talk a little bit about our communities. I heard a lot of testimony about how much we, the credit unions, deposit and give to nonprofits. And they give scholarships. And they even talk about doing stuff with the FFA, and great. These are laudable, and I certainly don't put them down because they are great for our communities. But what most people don't realize is that FDIC insured banks, not NCUA, but FDIC insured banks, both nationally and state chartered, must comply with the Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA. The CRA was enacted in 1977 to ensure that each insured depository institution serves the convenience and needs of the entire community, especially low-income and moderate-income neighborhoods. In essence, that's what your community banks do. And not only are they required to do that, well, let me back up a little bit. We're not talking about giving to charitable organizations or providing scholarships. These are the loans that, like in my hometown of Lander, that go to the reservation. You can't look at any community and say, well, we don't want to lend on the other side of the tracks because we're prohibited from doing it. And not only does the Community Reinvestment Act require us to do that, but the regulators that regulate banks judge how much they're doing on the Community Reinvestment Act. So that's a different playing field right there. Credit unions don't have that obligation. Why is that distinction so important? Because if credit unions can take public deposits, which are actually, by the way, taxpayer funds, they can accept deposits without investing in their local community and residents. They can give charitable stuff, they can do all that stuff, but they don't have to invest in their residents or their workers in that community. And as such, a credit union could take deposits locally and invest them anywhere in that credit union's footprint. Take notice next time you go down towards Denver that there's an event center down there. That we used to have a name of a brewery on the side of it that doesn't now. It has the name of a credit union on it. These are, any discernible benefit that they get is outweighed by what they're doing with the money. They're putting this into event centers. That's not going back into your communities. It's not going back into the low-income and moderate-income families either that need the financial assistance. They do, I will admit, they do provide their members with services at lower cost than banks. And why? Because they don't pay the taxes and they're not required to do the loans on other things. So fairness, I think that's how this stuff started, was that I often hear this, credit unions, we need to be fair, but they're subsidized. They're subsidized to do stuff in the communities that your other businesses aren't. Use this as an example. Let's say General Motors and Daimler Chrysler are told that you can build whatever kind of vehicle you want. And you can sell them all you want as long as the purchaser of those vehicles pays sales tax. Ford, on the other hand, is exempt because all they're going to make is electric vehicles. And we're not going to charge sales tax on that. And everybody's in agreement and everybody accepts that. And then the laws keep changing. And pretty soon, Ford is allowed to build pickups and SUVs and everything else, but they keep their tax exempt status. How far is enough? Stay in your lane, but you can't. These guys just keep going and they keep taking and taking at the expense of our state and our community. They do provide a valuable service, I have nothing against them. I'm a member of a credit union. My kids are a member of a credit union, and it works well. But this is business. And you want to take taxpayer funds and put them in something that is not paying any taxes. Senate File 143 authorizes these monies to go into credit unions. And remember, these are local taxes people paid into the various communities, whether it's the state, the county, the city, the ditch district, whatever. Those are taxpayer funds, and that's what we're doing with them. And keep in mind this, regarding the missions, the credit union's mission is to provide quality financial service to its members. And I've heard that 4 times today, and I agree. But a bank's mission, by statute, is required to provide quality financial services to its communities. And that's why it does what it does, and that's why they have the regulations they do. In conclusion, I would just say that at the Wyoming Bankers Association, our view is simple. If you want to engage in banking activities, you should be regulated and taxed like a bank and have the responsibilities of a bank. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions? Any questions for Mr. Meyer? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple. You know, we heard in earlier testimony that there was a pretty significant amount of these funds that are actually being invested out of state and not through in-state, state-chartered banks, and that we have communities around the state, for example, that don't have a local community state-chartered bank, and they have a credit union local. Is it your supposition and the Banking Association supposition that it's better for us to be effectively exporting those funds out of state? That's better than having it in a federal credit union
Mr. Chairman,
in state?
Senator Rothfuss, no, but I think you have to understand what's really happening. Some of those big banks that are taking that, because they're the only ones big enough to handle it. Now, we know that there's one credit union in this state that may be big enough to handle some of that, but they aren't going to be able to handle the state of Wyoming stuff. So is it better that they go out? No, I'd rather have them stay here, but it's the capabilities. And so when you talk about smaller communities, there's a lot of communities that don't have either one, and they still make sure that they do banking. Consider the fact that almost everything is remote deposits. You know, we're talking cash. How much cash is really going to have to be moved? That's the reality.
And Mr. Chairman, what about the TDOAs where we see that, you know, only about half of the banks in the state are even engaged in that program over time, disallowing credit unions that want to be when half of our state banks are choosing not to be? I guess I'm having a little bit of a challenge there. If that's something that is of great value, why wouldn't all of the states be participating? Excuse me, all of the banks in the state be participating?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't know which banks you're talking about. I know that there are a lot of banks that do, and some of them don't do it at all, probably because there are, under the statutes, the requirements that you have to bond every public deposit. And so some of those can be onerous. I don't know. I would have to find out for you. I don't know if there are any banks that are not.
And a final question, Mr. Chairman, and this is something that, you know, I've been wondering about for a while, talking about the taxes and discussion about taxes as being a relatively large deal. You know, we hear about it for federal income tax, and then there's a suggestion of kind of a little battle between state and local taxes. But is there a figure that the Banking Association has about the total aggregate amount of taxes that state chartered banks have paid to the state of Wyoming through sales and use tax total and property tax total that we could get? And I'd ask the same thing for the credit unions, because, you know, I did some analysis a few years ago trying to look industry by industry at what the total tax burden was on industries. And that analysis from the LSO came up with, unsurprisingly, about a 30% gross tax burden on the mineral industry, for example. It's incredible they're at 30%. Retail's at 10%. And then we have things like engineering, down around 1%, but oddly enough, the financial services sector, including banking and federal credit unions, was less than 0.1% of gross revenue going through to taxation. So it was actually the lowest sector. And so I'm just contemplating, you know, we're hearing this battle of taxes, but from the state's perspective, it's not a lot of taxes either way, is it? Or am I missing something?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, well, there is something you're missing, I guess, because we don't have a state income tax.
Would you like one?
Definitely not.
Okay.
But as long as you're here, I would tell you that maybe they can use cryptocurrency to pay their stuff and not have to worry about cash.
Fair.
I think that you have a very interesting question, and it's something that I've been working with, and so we have contracted with the University of Wyoming to help produce those numbers. But I don't have them now, but I think every community needs to have something like that.
Good. Any other questions for Mr. Meyer? Other questions? Other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Meyer, for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Anybody else in the room? Anybody else in the room? We have 4 people in Zoom. Is that right, Sue?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. They're coming in now, 2 of them.
Would you like to put some of them in for a short dissertation on Senate File 143? Joel, go ahead with your short dissertation. You're doing pretty good so far, Joel. Short. Yeah, he's short and sweet, isn't he?
Was there a second?
He's on there, but we're not getting his voice. We're not getting your voice, Mr. Highsmith. Mayor.
There he is.
Oh, Town of Shoshone.
There he is.
Town of Shoshone. Mr. Highsmith.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we see you also. Thank
Oh,
you.
very good. I appreciate it. One thing I'd like to touch on, like I said, Ashley did very well and Commissioner Botany explained most things. But I would like to, we don't have a bank in our town. We do have Atlantic City Credit Union. But I'd like to talk about Atlantic City Credit Union. It's been a very good corporate partner. They blend well with our community. They have local personnel. This goes back as far as over 40 years, near 50 years. I have seen some issue. I know Mr. Myers talked about helping communities and most of the banks, but I've had issues with some of the banks actually prejudice against lending money in Shoshone. Seriously, especially on real estate. We one time had a local bank, but I went and lost that in the 80s. But and not all banks. Let me make it clear: not all the big banks have done that, but they're a good corporate partner, and it would sure be easy for us and other nonprofits and municipalities like us across the state. And there were many. Shoshone is a mid-sized community in the state of Wyoming. At 649, we was the 51st largest municipality in the state. So most of Wyoming is what people call a little town. And it can benefit us a lot to be able to be able to deposit our municipal funds and in a credit union and not just a bank. It gives us more options. And my work with the credit union, they've been very, very mindful and helpful of lending money like into Shoshone. And like I said, not all banks, but I've had experience with banks personally. Property isn't worth as much or not as well, the willingness to loan money in Shoshone. And I've seen that for almost 50 years. But I support Senate Bill 143, and I believe it's a great thing for the whole state of Wyoming. And it's gonna help a lot of smaller communities and larger communities too, but most of Wyoming is small communities. And any questions?
Mr. Highsmith, if this goes through, will you be able to have a malt shop in Shoshone again?
Hey, that is on my bucket list ever since I was elected mayor. I'm in my 7th year. I will honestly say it's always been a heck no when I try to talk the owner to sell it. But he winked a little bit last year, so we're still working on that. And we do have citizens that worked in the original malt shop that has the recipe for the malts, and we can continue on with the old malts. And that is a priority.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Thank you,
Any other
Chairman.
questions for the mayor? Any other questions for the mayor? Hearing none, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Highsmith. We look forward to your malt shop. Who's next, Sue? Who is it? Brian Bubeaker. Yeah, there he is. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Brian. We can see you. I don't know if we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Brian Rohrabacher, and I'm President and CEO of Atlantic City Federal Credit Union with offices in Lander, Riverton, and Shoshone. And as you can hear from previous testimony, especially from Bobby, you know, our credit union, our ranching community was denied a PIVA loan. And then, of course, when we started to look at a memory care center in Lander, we were all the financial institutions in Lander put in funding for this study. And then once it got to go to the next step, we were denied to be able to participate in the funding of it, even though the project eventually did not go through. But it was available for by the USDA. The USDA does allow for credit unions to participate in these funding projects like the Memory Care Center. But it's just the state of Wyoming where we can, and it's all because of public funds. And I'm glad that Mayor Highsmith did get on and was able to share some of his concerns with the community of Shoshone. But as you can see, there's many consequences for the communities in Wyoming by not allowing public funds to be accessible to our credit unions. So, Mr. Chairman and committee members, I do ask for your support of this bill. And thank you, and I would answer any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you, Brian. Is there any questions for Brian? Any questions for Brian? Any questions for Brian? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Cowan. Mr. Cowan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Cowan, Sweetwater County Treasurer. Just speaking in support of this bill, especially on the investment side. This morning, the Good Bringer brought a bill to allow us to invest in equities. I speak on this on the investment side for CDs. At one point in the last 18 months, a CD in a credit union would yield about 125 basis points more than I could get in a bank. As I look today, that differentiation is about 35 basis points that I can get better in a credit union. So I look at what we try to do for our county and get the greatest yield. And these investments can be in our local credit unions, and those monies go back out into our community, invested in loans, in people in our communities. So I speak in support of this bill and stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cowan. Any questions for Mr. Cowan? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Do we have Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeremy Gibson. I'm with Toronto Valley, serving about 30,000 members, primarily in Southwest Wyoming. As passionate as I am about this bill, out of respect for the committee's time, I feel like I don't really have anything further to add. Bobby's done a great job, and just want to end by thanking the committee for your time and ask for your support with Senate File 143. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any questions for Jeremy? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Jeremy, for being with us.
Thank you.
I think that closes out the Zoom group. So the Zoom and the room have all spoken. We'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill by Cooper. Seconded by Rothfuss. Any changes, additions, deletions, corrections?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we've worked this bill repeatedly over the last 3 or 4 years. I think it's a good, solid bill, just like it sits. I really can't see much that needs done to it.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, a quick question for Senator Nethercott. You know, the one issue that was raised that is a little thought-provoking, in my view, is the idea of if you have a local government acting as a depository, then they effectively have a vote with respect to the governance of the entity. I didn't really hear anyone addressing that, and I was wondering if other states might have looked at something where it basically says these are non-voting shares or something along those lines so that you don't have that conflict in place. I don't know if there's a solution out there, but it was something that was intriguing to me.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I find it intriguing as well, and I'll provide the committee and the full Senate, if this bill passes, with additional information. But on that topic, I find great comfort in that. As our state has suffered from debanking, from dangerous ESG policies that would hurt our legacy industries, that directly affect the Minerals Committee for oil and gas development, coal, and how our very way of life. And so we are shipping out hundreds of millions of Wyoming tax dollars to be invested in those banks that would harm our very industries. So, quite candidly, I take great comfort in the fact that Wyoming would have a greater ability to control their financial institutions' destiny in support of those legacy industries. So it's good with me.
Yes, go ahead. Senator Rothfuss.
Are there any credit unions, to your knowledge, that, it's my understanding typically your first $5 or whatever is your share, and then it doesn't depend on additional deposits. I could be wrong on that, but that's the typical model as I understand it. And the concern I would have if it were otherwise would be the potential that, you know, if you had a large investment from a community, if it was on a dollar basis, the persuasion that that might be a disproportionate representation. But I don't think anyone does it that way. I think it's just a share as a shareholder. And that's the only possible discomfort. Is that accurate, that it's a share per shareholder and that it's not, seeing a lot of heads going up and down? Is it possible to have an exception to that? There is no exception to that. Senator Nethercott, what are your thoughts?
I defer to the head nods.
Fair. Thank you.
Did you get your answer by just a sheer head nod? A lot of head nods, huh? All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other comments? Anything else? I don't know. Maybe we should just hold this bill.
Do a roll call.
I think maybe we need to go down the hall for a minute.
Maybe we should do a roll call on this. Sue, why don't you call the roll? See
Mr.
who
Chairman?
wants to do this.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 143. Senator Cooper?
Aye.
Senator Jones? Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
Aye.
Chairman Anderson?
No.
Mr. Chairman, you have 4 ayes,
Oh, Jim.
1 no.
That bill, Senate File 143, has passed the Senate Minerals Committee. We have one more bill to hear. Hopefully, we can get through it this term. Senate File 135, and I think one of the makers is here. Hey, no, this is really fun. You guys need to stay. This is really good stuff.
Thank you.
Boy, that cleared it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really know how to clear a crowd. Absolutely. The banking is,
I think I have to have you get out there, Senator Rothfuss.
I don't have to if you don't want me to.
I want you to.
You want me to?
Yep.
All right, I'll do it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Nethercott's on it too.
She did it. She did it without being told.
I need to see your faces.
Yeah.
Great shiny faces.
Yeah, we're very nervous.
You ran everybody off, so now you get to be out there.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Senators.
yes, Senator.
I bring Senate File 135, Defense of State Banking 1. This is a product of the Interim Blockchain Select Committee.
Please note the co-sponsors.
And please note the co-sponsors, members of the Blockchain Select Committee. As you may recall, if it relates to Title 13, banking, basically, we're not able to sponsor the legislation through the Select Committee. We bring it to the Minerals Committee, or we individually sponsor it. So this is the product of the interim, but is individually sponsored in accordance with our Select Committee statutes. So, Mr. Chairman, we have had, as I believe you all know, some challenges with our special purpose depository institution banking charter system over the past few years, where we've been challenged by some federal regulations, both from the FDIC side of things, but also the Federal Reserve, and that's led to court cases and also challenges for these companies to actually do their business model, engage in their business model, because our statutes are not being lawfully recognized. So these have ended up in courts, but one of the challenges we have is the idea that really the Fed's interpretation, both through the FDIC and through the Reserve, don't just affect these companies, they affect the state of Wyoming. They affect our ability to diversify our economy, and they've held back the development of an industry in the state of Wyoming because we have adverse interests at the federal level. And it's not just the cryptocurrency industry, it's not just the digital asset side of things. There are other areas where we know that the banks have been defunding the state of Wyoming and debanking the state of Wyoming industries that are of interest to the state of Wyoming. So this legislation tries to provide clear authority for our Attorney General to intervene in that type of legislation and those types of behaviors at the federal level without actually having to have an individual company filing, but the state itself can file. And that's done through this act. We see in Section 1. Section 1 is non-codified, just indicating a general preference that when federal financial regulators overreach or abuse their authority in the regulation of Wyoming state chartered banks, the harm extends not only to the bank, but the state of Wyoming itself, and provides some additional context. On page 2, going into Title 13 related to banking statutes, we have the Defense of State Banking Act, where the legislature begins by finding and declaring that a dual banking system has existed since 1863, and that this dual banking regulatory structure has allowed individual states to be responsive to the banking needs of their citizens. Dual banking system has mitigated the tendency of regulators to stifle innovation, and we know, as we see on page 3, it says that recent events suggest this may longer be the case, that it's a dual equal banking system. Romanet 2, in order for the dual banking system to succeed, the state and nationally chartered banks must be fairly treated under the law, treated equally, with no undue regard to the origin of a bank's charter, political inclinations, or any other concerns beyond the explicit scope of the law. This is a key point that we talk a lot about. When we're thinking about debanking, it tends to be a bank being pressured by the FDIC to disfavor some particular type of industry. We've seen that a lot. There were some concepts called Operation Choke Point 2.0, where the FDIC was actively engaged in manipulating what banks could bank and not bank. And as a result, that's harmed a number of our industries, but certainly the digital asset industry. We see in Romanet 3 that the state of Wyoming has an interest in ensuring that its laws authorizing state chartered banks are given due consideration by other states and the United States, and that Wyoming chartered state banks are treated fairly by regulatory authorities to the extent any disparate treatment is caused by Wyoming's innovative but lawful banking laws. So that lays out a case that the state can in and of itself engage and try to defend our statutes, our laws on behalf of the state, not requiring a specific entity to have to file in its own defense. The B provision calls that the Attorney General shall investigate any allegation by a Wyoming State Chartered Bank of unlawful disparate treatment by federal or other states' regulators. And then the next sentence is key. The Attorney General shall take any available action deemed necessary to defend Wyoming's interest in the dual banking system. And that's a key concept. We negotiated that with the executive to provide the directive that if there is merit there, that the AG is going to take action, but the deemed necessary clause was in consultation with the governor to ensure that there was flexibility where if no action was deemed appropriate, then no action would be taken. And Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. It is just to try and ensure that the state itself has the capacity to defend its banking system, its dual banking system, without having to wait for one of our companies to have to file because they're being treated unfairly, and then the state can try and protect them perhaps by additional filings. And this is based clearly on some significant experiences we've had recently that if this had been in place, it would have been helpful. That's the legislation, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the presenter? Any questions? I have a question on page 3, line 18 and line 21. We're using shall, the Attorney General shall. Can we do that? Can we tell the Attorney General what to do? Is that going to be permissible with the executive branch?
Mr. Chairman, this language was vetted by the executive branch. I hope they're here to comment on it. I haven't actually looked back. Hello. Yes, they are here. So they will provide any further comment, but it was worked with them, and I hope this language is where it needs to be. If not, I'm happy to work with them to get it into a better form. But the key language that they were interested in when we worked this during the interim was that line 21, shall take any available action deemed necessary. So that is the Attorney General's opinion as to whether or not it's a necessary action. So it gives the Attorney General the flexibility to make decisions on what is or is not appropriate action.
Other questions for the presenter? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank
Senator
you.
Rothfuss, for your presentation. Any agencies like to speak on this good little bill? Senate File 135.
She's been in committee all day. She was with me this morning, and now she's here at lunch.
Wow,
She's may as well be a senator.
busy girl, huh?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Betsy Anderson. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and General Counsel for Governor Gordon. Thanks for letting me speak on the bill today. I want to start with the governor certainly supports the principles outlined in the bill. The dual banking system is very important to our state and our nation, and we need to protect the state banking system and make sure that it remains viable. So we do feel like the principles within this bill are very important. I just had two things I wanted to address. The first is, I would just say there is an overriding separation of powers issue, but I'm not going to dwell on that issue right now. The second is the section, Chairman Anderson, that you brought up, this new section 131901B. And as Senator Rothfuss went over, it's the Attorney General shall investigate any allegation of Wyoming State Chartered Bank of lawful disparate treatment by federal or other states' regulators. And the Attorney General shall take any available action deemed necessary to defend Wyoming interests in the dual banking system. I would just say we did work with Senator Rothfuss, who's very kind to come and talk with our office, and we worked with the Attorney General's office on what would be acceptable language. The first preference of the AG's office was not the one that Senator Rothfuss would, which, as you said, was to change the two shalls to mays. And the reason for this is when you have a private bank that could come in and say, you shall investigate, now you investigate and you have to take action. At what point does it look like the Attorney General is now representing a private bank? And they can't do that. They can only represent the state of Wyoming. So they have their own professional code of responsibility that they have to abide by from an ethical basis. And that really makes that very murky. And then the second sentence, and as Senator Rothfuss said, that the deemed necessary language was added, which helps quite a bit. But I do think that it is always, people have causes of action, can bring it action all the time. Sometimes that's not the best strategy. Sometimes it is going through other avenues, talking to federal agencies. There may be other alternatives to get to your end goal. And you may decide that your best strategy is not to bring a legal action. And I get the deemed necessary language maybe provides for that, but the first preference was to change shall to may. And it is of the opinion that my recollection, and I don't want to speak, Senator Rothfuss can certainly correct any of the conversations and the comments that were made, but as I understand it from the Attorney General's office, there really is no other provision that says they shall take an action, and they shall investigate based off of a private citizen complaint. So that's definitely the preference. We appreciate all the efforts over the interim to get something that's at least better, but that would be the preference. And I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Betsy? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah Bishop, State Banking Commissioner. I'm not going to speak a whole lot on this bill. It was worked during the interim, but I do want to keep most of my comments just for our record. But first off, pointing out priorities with the last bill. First off, the Go Herders and then getting a malt shop open, I think is a very good priority. But as far as this bill goes, this is in Title 13, and as a commissioner, I'm the administrator of Title 13. However, there's not a lot in here that tells banks or the Division of Banking what to do, and I think that is on purpose. This is some of the discussion we had. What the Attorney General does, I have no part in that. I think that comes from the head executive, and I don't want to cross paths. But I do want to put on the record that we have a different relationship with some of the other regulators at the Division of Banking. We work very closely with a lot of them. In Wyoming, if you're a state chartered bank, you are regulated by our office, but also by the FDIC and the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So these are some of these agencies that could have action brought against them by the state of Wyoming. This has been attempted before. Even if that's going on, I still have to work well with them. They're staffing my exams when they're short staffed and vice versa. We still have to work together. And so I kind of just want to put that on the record that if anything happens, I'm not the one directing this. We still have to work together. And when it has happened before, they were more than welcome to continue our good relationships. But I do want to have that be part of this legislative record. With that, I'd answer any questions.
Very good. Jeremiah, any questions? Any questions? Any questions? You covered it quite nicely, Jeremiah. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Any other agencies, anyone like to speak?
We're waiting for the very last. It's 1:38. Just helping you out.
Go ahead.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. This is a pretty broad act. When you look at it, you say, I can see a lot of possibilities in this. Any allegation is extremely broad. And I think, as Senator Roth was brought up as to why this was needed, it seems like it involves the legal argument between a recent Federal Reserve Board decision in one of our Wyoming state chartered banks over the definition and how things are turned out. Your Wyoming community banks, let me make one point clear, because I heard that Senator Rothfuss made this comment, but your Wyoming community banks do not debank anybody, ever. So any allegation or any thought about that is,
Back on the bill.
I am on the bill.
Okay.
So we have that same issue sometimes, because people lump us into this thing. When you look at some of the regulations and some of the things that come out of, for example, the CFPB, or the FDIC, or the Federal Reserve, some of those by statute say they don't apply to us. But when you have regulators come in and say, well, I know that it only applies to banks that are $5 billion in assets or less or fewer, it doesn't really apply. Their response is generally, we think it's best practices. And if you don't follow their best practices, then all of a sudden you have regulators. So we get caught up into that as well. Another example is under the CFPB, there's Rule 1071 that's been going out. We've been fighting this for years.
Question here. Mr. Meyer, just a minute.
Thank you. Just because we are short on time, and I would like to get directly onto the bill itself. You've identified some language in there that I think you find broad. And I guess just generally speaking, do you object to the Attorney General defending state banking, and if so, why? And concerns very specifically as it relates to the bill, so that we can start working it here shortly.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, my point is that when you look at all the things that are going on, and especially the lawsuits that have been filed over the last 2 or 3 years by other states, I question whether that fiscal note that says none is really appropriate, because I'm looking at this going, wow, this could be big. This would definitely help your Wyoming community banks if the state would pick up some of the battles on our behalf as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, it's your testimony that it would be good for the local banks?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, if I'm reading that correctly, then I would say it'd be good for Wyoming community banks.
Okay, all right. And are you about to wrap up?
I'm done.
You are?
I'll stand for any other questions.
Other questions? Mr. Meyer, other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Meyer, for being with us again.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Anyone else in the room? And we have one on Zoom, I believe.
He's no longer online.
Oh, he went out with all those other guys, huh? Dusty, way to go. Okay, all right. The room is all done and the Zoom is all done. We'll close public testimony. And I wasn't ready yet. Moved and seconded,
I have a motion.
and there's a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
page 3, line 18,
yes.
the Attorney General may investigate.
And line 21.
Line 21, we're going to change that shall to is authorized
Oh,
instead of may.
did you get that, Sue? May on line 18 and is authorized on line 21. Would you like to explain yourself?
Just briefly on the amendment, it needs to be is authorized to on line 21.
Correct. Friendly amendment.
Friendly. It's authorized to take any available action. Any other discussion? Other discussion? Hearing none? Yeah,
I'll just say, yeah, I want to make sure that the executive is comfortable with it, so I'm happy to take that alternative language. I assume they are, yeah.
Executive is giving us a nod. All right, that's all we need is a nod up here. Thank you. Thank you, yeah, friendly nod. All right, all in favor of the motion to change shall to may and shall to is authorized to, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Any other changes, additions, deletions to Senate File 135?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to move for a $75 million appropriation.
There will be no second.
Just kidding.
All right, let's have a roll call then, Sue, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 135 as amended. Senator Cooper?
Aye.
Senator Jones? Aye. Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
Aye.
Chairman Anderson?
Aye.
You have 5 ayes, Mr. Chairman.
Senate File 135 has snuck by the Senate Minerals Committee. We'll hear it on the floor. And who's going to take care of this on the floor? Senator Rothfuss. And who's going to take care of 143?
Senator Cooper.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Senator
pretty sure that Senator Nethercott.
Senator Nethercott's going to take care of that one. Okay, anything else, Sue? Nope. Okay, we're adjourned then. 1:45. Wow, we